time to get on to part 2 and hope that things hopefully go well. So, oh dear. Okay, so here we go. Just gonna lie down. Alright. Alright. Okay. Here we go. Blue Star is in his room, admiring his cutie mark, and was just simply enjoying everything that it represented to him. It represented strength, love, control, and of course himself. This was something that belonged to him and meant so much to him, and a part of him would never give it up again. He had made that mistake once, he won't make it again. Still, he wondered what it would cost him to bear this mark. It appeared it would cost him everything that he had truly wanted: to serve, to be a guard. He didn't want to place his selfish desires above serving, but he couldn't stop being who he was. His cutie mark might have been told him to walk into that pool, but it was also telling him now to not let go of who he was. That this wasn't the only way. There was a different way. Perhaps a better way. His way. He didn't quite know what that was. He was afraid. Afraid that maybe that path wouldn't lead anywhere. That his own selfish desires might be his undoing, but inside he knew to walk this path and have faith that it would lead to where he wanted to go, where he needed to go. Then there was a knock at the door, and it brought him back to reality. From the place inside where he simply played with his emotions and let them wash over him, and now was back to reality. The door opened and a guard came out and said that they were ready to see him now. He asked who, and he said the two princesses, Princess Luna and Celestia. He shouldn't have been surprised, but he was. So he walked nervously out of the room and followed the guard. He didn't know where he was taking him. Just that it wasn't quite where he was expecting. It was outside in the courtyard. There were 3 other ponies there, all recruits, all in white, with matching armor. It wasn't gold, but just simply silver. Training armor given to new recruits. The golden armor that the guard wore still had to be earned. He was told to stand beside them, and so he did. And a moment later the 2 princesses, one of day, one of night, came out and stood before them. And each bowed in respect and reverence to their leaders and to their mentors. Blue Star closed his eyes as he bowed. momentarily afraid to look them in their eye. But as he came back up again, he opened his eyes and saw them looking at him. Then, glancing at each of the other three, and then Celestia spoke. You four are our final candidates for a truly special mission. Each one of you could do this job, but I'm afraid only one will be chosen. She turned to Luna, who paused for a moment, considering. Each one of you is powerful and strong and brave, but we still need an answer. We do not know which one of you will go on to this task, only that today that decision will be decided. Here, now. We've proposed a series of tests for you. Some physical, some mental, some that will test you in ways you never thought possible. The one who passes will be the one that we choose. You have 1 hour to prepare. To prepare whatever you need. Before, the tests were limited. But now, this is a test of you, of your character, of your gifts. She glanced at BlueStar for a moment, as though she was speaking directly to him, but turned away before the others could realize. This is your time to shine. Do what you have to do. Dismissed. And then the two princesses backed away, and then simply turned around and walked away, back into the castle, leaving the 4 ponies to stand there, almost alone, and each looked at the other, not certain, but sizing up the competition. Then they turned to him, and looked at him, and realized what had happened, that he was not in the same white they all had. And as they walked by, some of them were angry, because they had been willing to make the change, but he was not. At first he didn't say anything. He felt like he didn't have an answer for them. He didn't feel that they were wrong, but he didn't feel they were right either. And he had been willing. It was just, it wasn't him. He just couldn't. He couldn't be like everyone else. It wasn't his destiny. And so they were escorted back to their rooms, were each prepared in their own way. And it was here that BlueStar broke out something that he had brought with him, but didn't expect to use. One of the 2 devices that his father had constructed for him. And a further 2 that he had made himself. He had made himself a mini piece of armor that each of the devices bolted to, so that one was at each side. Right now they were pivoted facing backwards, so they would be out of the way. But when they were in use, they would pivot forwards. And with his mind, he would aim each individually, so that his horn and the two devices at his side could be aimed together, or perhaps at 3 separate targets. He had practiced this for many, many days, until his mind hurt. He had found a way to complete his father's work. It had happened unexpectedly one day. He was out in the fields, depressed, sad. He had been working for so long. He had no answers. His heart was heavy. He sat down in the tall grass and just simply wondered why he couldn't find the answer. He just wanted to give up. And for a moment he did. He laid his head down between his hooves, and inside just cried. Until a tear finally came through and rolled down his face. Still, the answer didn't come at first. He picked himself up and began to walk home when he saw something in the grass. It was a simple pea pod. How it had gotten there, he didn't know. He didn't pay any attention to it, so he kicked it aside and began to walk away when he saw what was inside. Just as several round peas contained inside the pod came rolling out. And at first, this didn't seem to take notice. Slowly inside his head, something sparked. An idea, concept, perhaps even an answer. Bit by bit, the answer came. He saw what he needed to do. He saw something more than a simple pea pod, but perhaps an answer. As he walked home, he found that he was excited, that inside he knew he found something, and he tried to rush to make it happen. He pulled out the devices that he had been working on. And tried to prove their design, basing it off his father's first device. And he realized, bit by bit, that he finally had the answer. It was not possible to store enough magic in a single container, a single pod as his father had called it. It just wasn't possible. So he had to have multiples of that pod, and find a way to detach it and add a new one. And each one he knew had to be like the others. They had to contain the cells, round just like the pea pods, in some kind of container. And so he came up with something. He made a simple box and placed the cells inside it. He was able to simply throw it aside when it was spent and put a new one in that was fully charged with magic. With this, he was able to find a way to finally make this device work, to fire more than once, and to be able to continue to be used even when the magic inside of it had been used up. He built a prototype. It didn't work. He looked at it and didn't understand why it wouldn't work. To look closely and saw the flaw, repaired it, and tried again. It fired twice and didn't work. Again, another flaw, minor, but important nonetheless. And repairing it, and the next, and the next, and the next, eventually came upon his design. And then he built several of the devices that he simply called the magic pods that stored the energy that made this weapon work. He made several. And he made each contain a different kind of magic, one for stunning, one for destruction, and built 2 of these pods to the side of each of his devices, which he had simply named casters, because they casted spells. Then he built his armor, a simple piece of metal loop that looped around him and mounted it on a pair of swivels that enabled each to be able to manipulate it separately. And it took some practice to get used to lifting the pods with his mind and placing them into position. But in time, he learned, and he had succeeded after a long, hard, and difficult struggle. And when he first tried it, there were still issues to work out, as there always were. But soon those issues were just a memory, and he had finished his work, his father's work. And he was happy. He had accomplished what he had wanted for so long. He wanted to rush to show someone, but then realized there was no one for him to show, other than his mother, who had always been there for him. For a moment this made him sad, but he realized that maybe it just wasn't time yet. But that his time would come. And he was right. The time had come. He had not been allowed to use these casters during the original trials because it was unfair, and he agreed. But Luna had basically told him that this was his time. This was his time to show what he truly was capable of. Perhaps they wouldn't be needed at all. But this time, he'd be ready. They'd be ready. And so, he placed the casters on his side, made sure that each of the magazines was charged. That each was secured to his side, ready and waiting. And then tried to prepare himself. He knew that whatever tests lie ahead, He knew that they would most likely be the most important of his life. That perhaps everything he had ever worked for would come down to the following tests, the following hours, perhaps the following minutes. And he was afraid. He was scared. He didn't want to fail. In his mind, he was more afraid than he had ever been. He thought that he should be. So he relaxed, calmed himself, remembered how hard he had worked and trained. He was ready for this. He had become all he could. If he would fail, it would not be because he did not try. It would be because the others were better. But he would fight with everything he had and do what he could. The only thing left to do was just to close his eyes, prepare, store what strength he had, be ready to use it when the time came. And he did this until the guard knocked on the door again and summoned him back to the courtyard. Taking a deep breath, walked out the door to go face his destiny. Once again, the princesses were waiting for them. But all eyes turned briefly to BlueStar and the string devices on his sides. It was certainly unexpected. The others, some had nothing, some carried other equipment and saddlebags on their backs. But no one had ever seen devices quite like them, except for the two princesses. Luna looked at him, not surprised. In fact, she seemed pleased. Celeste, however, was confused. He looked at him, and then suddenly realized and remembered where those devices had come from. Looked at her sister, and then looked back at him. For a moment, had nothing to say. But he could tell that she sensed something personal between Luna and BlueStar, and she did not like it. And then she spoke. Recruits, I am glad that you are here, as we have an important task for each of you. But only one of you can be ready for this task. The first test is one of skill, strength, determination. Each one of you will stand and simply fight. Whoever does the best wins. And they were led to an area to the side where a number of targets had simply been set up. BlueStar was confident. This is what he was good at. This is what he trained for. Something didn't feel right. There was something else. Then he saw it. Something in the sky. He noticed the shield, the first time. Shield above him. The others soon noticed as well. Celestia spoke. Don't worry. Shining Armor is practicing. He's practicing to meet each of you later. Worry about what's before you, not what's above you. Then she pointed to the first of the candidates and told him to stand in front of the line. As he did, the others looked at each other curiously. They didn't know who Shining Armor was, but Blue Star did. He had heard of him. In researching the main six, he had learned that he was Twilight's brother, and that he had a very powerful defensive magic, one that he was pretty certain that his offensive magic would not break. And he seriously hoped that the next test would not involve finding Shining Armor. His attention then turned back to the first pony, who pointed his horn at the first target and fired, and struck it hard, and pointed to another and another, striking each with precision. Then a bell rang, and the score was tallied. He had done well, but Blue Star was confident he could do better. The next came, and he tried his hardest, but he did not beat the score of the previous pony. Nor did the third. Then it was his turn. Blue Star stepped up to the line and closed his eyes, prepared himself. He saw his cutie mark inside of him, glowing. As it began to glow, it then began to spin, growing as its power increased, ever brighter, until it spun so fast and glowed so bright that it was just a ball of bright blue. And when it was time to begin, he simply let his heart guide him once more, as it always had. It allowed him to just float and control that power that was his heart, and guide it to where it needed to be. He lowered his head and pointed his horn at the first target. At the same time, he used the power of his mind and of his heart to turn his casters forward and pointing at several more, had fired at 3 targets at the same time, striking each, and turned his attention to another with his main horn and struck it. Then in his mind he saw the targets, not with just his eyes, but feeling them with his magic. So at one point he simply closed his eyes and let his heart and his mind guide him. And soon the targets fell. All of them. He couldn't keep track of how many times he had missed. But he had destroyed the targets before the time went out. But he must admit that it cost him. He was tired. And he emptied 2 of his pods. Only 3 more remained for each caster. He looked back up at the princesses. Luna was happy. Celestia was a little confused, almost frightened. The others were angry. One spoke that he thought he had simply cheated. And the others joined in as well. They protested that he didn't deserve to have such a high score. And this made him angry. After everything he had done, he had worked so hard for, trained so hard for, they thought it was easy. He assured them that it was not. Even after the casters worked, learning how to control them proved to be very difficult. He had earned each one of those targets, and he was not going to be. And he would not let that be taken away. Then Celestia stomped her hoof so loudly and so hard that it seemed to shake all of Equestria, silencing them, and said simply that her sister and her would have to discuss this, decide what to do. Luna was clearly upset at the idea. Most likely she thought that he had acted fairly. He was surprised that Luna had been so supportive of him. But then he shouldn't have been. And so the minutes passed, and nothing seemed to happen. The others just glared at him angrily. He decided not to say anything to them. He knew that there was nothing he could say. But there were times he felt like maybe they were right. But maybe he had cheated. Maybe it was unfair. He didn't really know. He didn't want to win by cheating. He wanted to win in a fair fight. He wanted to prove that he was better. That he was the best, not because of what he had, but for who he was. So when Celestia and Luna came back, Celestia looked at him, angry, but somehow sympathetic. Luna was worried. She asked that he take the test again, but without his casters. He agreed. He believed he could still do better. And so he took off his armor, and using his magic lowered it to the ground beside him. and stepped forward. But unlike the others, had no armor, no outsides, just him. And once again he summoned the power that was in his heart and forced it out through his horn. This time he trusted completely in his senses, in his training, and did not open his eyes, but let himself, his heart, his mind, everything that was him guide him, trusting that he would hit his mark, that who he was would bring him through. And one by one the targets seemed to fall. He knew the time was running out. He didn't bother to count them, but he knew he needed every single one he could. But his strength was waning. He didn't know how long he could keep it up for. He tried to not think about how tired he was, how much each shot cost him. Soon he became exhausted, and with his sights set on one more target, the bell rang, and fired just after. Too late. And then collapsed to the ground, tired, exhausted. The others looked at him, still surprised. But not as surprised as before. She looked at Celestia. She shook her head no. He had managed to tie him. One target more, and he would have won. He could only feel despair, like he was back in that black water in the dream. No matter how hard he struggled, there was no way out. Could only give in. Luna looked at him, sad, disappointed almost, still looking at a failure, but then smiled. The test was not the first, it was just the first, not the last. And with his casters he had still prevailed. They did not say which results they were going to use, but he decided not to give up hope just yet. There were still 2 more tests to do. So they were led away to somewhere new. This time, it was a simple rope tied up a wall. And an armor and a suit of armor, heavy, unlike any he had ever seen. It was made of a heavy metal, and didn't shine or was not decorated beautifully. It simply looked like a piece of heavy steel. And when the first pony picked it, put it on, it was clear that this was its intent. The goal was simple, to simply pull themselves up that wall with that heavy weight attached to them. The first the one that currently was his biggest competition. Slowly made his way up, struggled, but ultimately prevailed, and when he reached the top, just held there, and then slowly let himself down again where he was told that he could. The others surprisingly did better. The second did a little bit better. The third almost went up that rope like it was easy. Then it was Blue Star's turn. The armor was about the heaviest thing he had ever worn in his life. It felt so heavy that if he fell to the ground it would crush him. As he picked up the rope and looked about how high it was, he was afraid. In his mind, this task was too hard for him. But again he found what would his father do? What would his father want him to do? How would his father think of him if he just gave up? He knew he had to do this. He had to give it his all. So after a brief moment, he found what he needed. Then it was time to go. So he climbed, struggling at first to find footing. Bit by bit he managed to climb, slowly, but climbing nonetheless. He tried to go faster, to somehow wheel himself up that rope. But his muscles were strained, and he knew if he pushed too hard he would simply fall. He decided to get to that top and not to fail. So slowly he inched his way up that rope, and closer to the top. He struggled. As he neared the top, he almost felt as though his strength would simply be gone by the time he got there. But inside him he said, I will not allow myself to fail. I will make it to the top. This is too important to me to give up. I will do what I need to do. And almost as he finished thinking this, his hoof just barely touched the top. So lightly that almost those looking from the ground didn't notice. And when he reached again, he managed to wrap his hoof around the top and hold himself there. And when they said for him to come down, he slid down the rope. Almost too fast. His muscles ached too hard for him to do anything more. When he slid into the bottom, the suit of armor collapsed his legs, and he simply fell to the ground. And several of the guard came and helped him, and released him from the armor. To his surprise, everyone was pleased for him, even the competitors. Perhaps because the competitors had known how hard it had been to climb that wall with that load. And he was grateful. Then the final test came. They were led away to the courtyard. for shining armor, a large, strong pony, dressed in purple armor, whose mane currently was covered by his helmet. His tail shone blue and yellow, blue and cyan. This was the first time he had ever seen shining armor. Captain of the Royal Guard. Someone strong, powerful, and if things went well, would probably be his boss, perhaps a friend. Definitely someone he'd looked up to. He was serious when he looked at each one of them, his eyes sharp, his eyes clearly indicating one of a leader, someone to be respected, and he respected him greatly. He knew that in an emergency he was the one that was responsible for protecting Canterlot. Personally, that his own shield would be used to protect an entire city of people. With his experiences in magic, he knew what a terrible burden that had to be. He wondered if there was anyone for him that would stand by him. He couldn't imagine doing a spell like that for so long without someone special to just be there for him. Then he looked and saw her, Princess Cadence, and remembered that they had been dating for several years. It was rumored they were going to be married soon. He believed those rumors, and he knew where the power came from. He wondered if the others did. Then each of the recruits stood before shining armor and bowed in respect. Then something unexpected happened. Shining armor pointed his horn at one of the recruits and fired at him. The recruit, unprepared, simply fell to the ground, briefly stunned. He said, "Your final test is to fight me one-on-one. Whoever wins goes on to this job." The other recruits were surprised. He was simply the most powerful pony there was. Other than the princesses, of course. They didn't stand much of a chance, even all four of them against him. Then he fired again at another pony. This time, more on guard, was able to deflect the attack away. The first pony who got hit managed to wake up and pull himself back up, but afraid. Each looked at the other, uncertain what to do. It had almost seemed as though shining armor had gone mad, and again fired at another one of the recruits, who simply turned the attack away, surprised that he would be able to do so at all. Then shining armor turned towards BlueStar and fear took hold of him. He couldn't believe what was happening. He didn't know what to do. And when the purple beam of energy came at him, the only thing he could do was deflect it away. But not with his magic, but with one of the sides of the casters, which fortunately he knew, when struck by a magic beam of that type, would simply attempt to store it or cast it away, which is exactly what happened. The beam struck the caster, absorbed it, and fired it out behind him. A desperate act that had been purely on instinct, but fortunately worked in his favor. The other 3 ponies decided to surround Shining Armor, several attempting to move around him, and he moved to do the same. He simply stood there, undetermined, unmoved, unafraid. The others glanced at each other, and someone said that they should fire together, and it seemed to be the right idea. So they all pointed their horns at him and fired together. But then the shield that had surrounded Canterlot disappeared, and magically, suddenly, and violently appeared all around Shining Armor. And each of the beams that had meant to hurt him were deflected away, that struck at their attackers. BlueStar was just amazed to be struck by his own spell, and he collapsed to the ground. Its crippling power came through him. He couldn't move. All he could do was try to stay conscious. But he failed. And he fell into dream, to memory, to the black that was his soul. And at first he didn't know how to get back out again. Then a memory came. His training. A long, long time ago. He was still learning the basics of magic, how to use it most effectively. He had gone to the lake, where the river where his father had passed on led to, and he simply trained to learn how to use his powers, to learn different spells. One of the hardest to do was to perform these spells under pressure, especially the harder, more complicated ones. His father taught him something. He had taken him to a cliff, although not a very high cliff, but a cliff nonetheless, about 20-30 feet high, overlooking the water. But to his shock, he saw his father jump off of it and vanish over the edge. A second later, like a shot with a brilliant flash of light, his father appeared behind him, magically teleported from where he was falling to behind his son, told him this was a vital lesson that he had to learn. And then he pushed his son towards the edge. Subtly, of course. but he knew he wasn't ready for this just yet. But it was important to show his son this lesson. Perhaps he somehow knew he would never have the opportunity to teach it to his son when he was ready. But on that day, many years later, he stood at that same cliff, and like his father, leapt off of it, and tried to teleport himself away before he struck the water below, and failed. Fortunately, he was not hurt. I don't think his father would have done such a thing if he tried, if he knew his son would be hurt if he failed. And he wasn't surprised. Sheer panic of falling like that broke his concentration completely. It was hard to do anything but think about falling. And so he tried again, and again, and again, until he felt sore from all the failed attempts. All he could do was just lay down, just be glad the day was over. He knew this was not an easy thing, but it still disappointed him that he could not learn it, at least not yet. And he remembered something else. How his father had made it a point to just play at the end of each day, when his muscles ached, that they would just play, or rest, or sometimes both. He remembered a special time they had taken off their armor and simply put it aside and let it rest on the ground. And they walked into the water and just swam and played the way a father plays with his young son. And he said this was an important part of your training, because rest and joy are just as important as working hard, because without it, there's nothing left fighting for. There's nothing left to fight with. There'll be nothing. Just nothing. He didn't understand, but now he did. His muscles ached from all the training already. He wished that he could just go to sleep. He was tired. To his mind, there was nothing else to do but just sleep. He didn't know what to do now. He knew he had to get up, but he could not. He was afraid again. He was drowning once again. Then he slowly found the strength to open his eyes once more. He came back to consciousness. His body ached, was sore. He did not try to move. He didn't want to see. He didn't want our shining armor to see that he was still awake, for fear that he would knock him back into subconscious again. so he opened his eyes slowly, carefully, trying to understand what was happening. 2 of the other ponies were still down. 1 was trying to fight off Shining Armor. He decided to simply run around Shining Armor, trying to keep away from that powerful horn of his. Shining Armor was doing his best to keep up with them. Part of Blue Star just wanted to lay down and go to sleep, admit defeat. But he decided this is the last thing he could do. But he didn't know what to do now. He couldn't possibly fight the powerhouse that was Shining Armor. And he still didn't understand why. Did they really expect them to be able to defeat him? He decided that he had to find out why. So he stood. He just simply stood. Just looked him in the eyes, trying to be as brave as he could. Then he remembered what his father had taught him. And inside his head he began to understand. Perhaps this was a different test. Perhaps it wasn't his power that would end this test. But he wasn't sure he could do what he knew he had to. He had never fully mastered the exercise at the cliff. It was only twice he had ever come close to succeeding. He stared at him. The Shining Armor noticed him and looked at him hard, like he was surprised that he was still standing. Blue Star's eyes were defiant. He sidestepped a little bit to the right and simply stared at him, still daring him to make a move against him. For a moment, Shining Armor's eyes were no longer hard. They were soft and sympathetic, almost proud, like he liked what he saw. But then in an instant, the hardness returned. His horn glowed, and a beam shot at him again. And Blue Star didn't think. Could only feel. But this time, instead of fear, it was the spell. The spell that he knew he needed to cast. He closed his eyes as hard and as fast as he could, and focused only on the spell. And he vanished, disappearing for just a moment. In that moment, no unicorn could ever describe what it felt like to be for a moment in non-existence, and then suddenly reappear. But when he reappeared, he saw what happened to Shining Armor. The beam that he had shot at him had gone and struck a hardened wall behind him and bounced right back at Shining Armor. He was too surprised to do anything but to see it strike him. And with the power of his own beam, weakened the shield. Just enough that maybe they had a chance to beat him after all. And BlueStar pointed his horn at Shining Armor and fired once again. But again the attack was deflected by his shield. The other pony, who had taken notice of what was happening, fired as well, but still it did nothing. This was a problem. The other ponies began to wake. But Shining Armor was angry. He didn't like being deceived. And so he shot again. This time he decided to simply fall to the ground and avoid the attack. Which gave him just enough time to pull himself together to teleport away to somewhere else before Shining Armor could fire again. But he knew this wouldn't work forever. They needed a new plan. He then realized the only way they had a chance of defeating him was together. And he remembered what Luna had told him. He realized why they were failing. Each one was fighting for themselves, not for each other. And that had to change. He knew he needed all of them. So he teleported himself next to one of the ponies that was still unconscious, and used his magic to shield them both, while he attempted to wake the pony up again. The other pony, who was trying to stay out of his way, Sprout shouted at him, wondering what he was doing. And BlueStar said, "We need to fight him together. We need to fight him as one. We need all of them." Do you understand? He didn't seem to agree with him. After a narrow miss from Shining Armor's attack, he decided that perhaps it would be better to fight together than alone. And the other pony moved to protect the other pony that was still dazed, confused. He protected him with a shield as well. Shining Armor decided that this was a good time for him to recover and rest. He had clearly used a lot of energy attempting to fight off these 4 ponies. He simply said, "You can't hide beneath your shields forever. Sooner or later you have to deal with me." And BlueStar knew he was right. He tried desperately to wake the sleeping pony. Ever afraid, Shining Armor had decided to look only at him. And he was afraid. He was afraid of what he saw in those eyes. Power. Power that he knew he could not match on his own. And this frightened him. It frightened him a lot more than he would have ever thought. Then with a gentle nudge, the sleeping pony woke. He wondered what was happening. BlueStar decided that he needed more help than simply a kind word. He touched his horn to his and gave some of his energy to that pony. His strength began to recover. He asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm helping you because I need you. We all need to fight him together." His pony didn't seem to understand or agree. When he saw shining armor staring at them, he asked, "Okay, what are we going to do?" "I don't know just yet, but I know we can't win alone." "So that's your great plan?" "It appears so. You got any ideas?" The other pony didn't understand. Why are you asking me?" "Because I don't have any ideas either. I just know we can't win alone." Did you figure that out by yourself?" "Actually, no." "Wow, you're really inspiring confidence in me." BlueStar, wasn't it? "Yeah. Well, I think you're crazy. But I'd rather just stay down, honestly." "Me too. I don't want to lose. We can't beat him. No one can." "I know. But I intend to try nonetheless. I need your help." "Why should I help you?" "Because if I fail, we all fail. If you fail, I fail. We all fail. I don't think this is about you and me, but us." You are crazy. But you know what? Let's give it a shot anyway. I don't like losing either. We go down, just promise me that we'll go down fighting. You got it. What is your name? Shining Star. Oh, Shining Star. Let's do this together. And with that, he helped him up. And they both stood together. And across from them they could see the other two ponies standing beside each other. And each nodded to the other, signaling they were ready. And together they dropped their shields. BlueStar and Shining Star ran. They ran faster than they ever thought they could. They tried to run away, to run so that it could escape that powerful beam. And just when it seemed it would catch them, the other two ponies fired as well, catching him at the side. But Shining Armor was not unaware of their presence and deflected their attack. Then each turned together for the brief distraction, and together they fired each of their magic. Shining Armor, caught slightly off guard, couldn't decide which attack to defend against first, and their combined powers simply overcome him. For a brief moment, then his shield came on again. This time, the shield came slamming at them, striking them, and throwing them against the wall. And each of them collapsed to the ground as the shield came off. And Shining Armor walked towards them, as each fell in a crumpled heap, eyes still angry and hard. And then he smiled. "Well done, recruits. You did well. I'm sorry I had to be so rough on you. But Princess Celestia told me how important it was for each of you to show what you all had. You did well, each of you. Farewell. I hope to see each of you again." And then he simply walked away. And the recruits just couldn't believe what had happened. They didn't understand just yet. And at the moment they were too tired to really care. It had been clear that Shining Armor had toyed with them all that time. How easily they could have brushed each one aside. Apparently, he had seen all he had needed to see in their final attack, and had simply decided to end the fight. And BlueStar felt hurt that he could be brushed aside so easily. But then he thought, this was Shining Armor. He was supposedly the most strongest unicorn, second only to the princesses. What shame was there in being beaten by him? But it still hurt him slightly. Then the two princesses, one light, one dark, came up to the students and looked at them and had compassion. And then it was Celestia who spoke. "Well done, recruits. You've done well. I'm sorry that we had to rough you up so badly. But true tests of character are never easy. I am proud of each and every one of you. Now, it's time for you to go back to your rooms, rest, recover, and in the morning we'll inform you of our decision. Be proud, cadets. I know each of you will serve us well." And then Celestia walked away, but Luna stayed for a moment and looked at each of the recruits and felt sorry for each. Then she turned to BlueStar, clearly intending to say something. but knowing better, joined her sister and walked away. Fortunately, none of the recruits were hurt physically, but they had aches and pains that made the walk back to their rooms hard and difficult. The bed of his room never felt so good, so comforting. And he simply collapsed into it and just relaxed and rested. This time there was little else he could do. And he just once again sunk into dream, allowed it to carry him, hold him, ease all his pain and fear, anxiety. He didn't understand what had happened. He never seemed to. It's clear that the princesses had their own plans. The tests that they had posed to the recruits were more than they could understand at first. There was no clear winner, at least not to them. So he simply followed his father's advice and just rested. Then his mind played and was back at that same lakeside, just floating, letting the water heal everything that was broken, that was sore, that was hurt. And in that moment, in that memory, he could rest. And then he fell asleep. This time, he dreamed something different. He dreamed Luna was with him. But he knew this was no dream. He knew Luna was here. Well done, Blue Star. What did I do? He said to her. Surprisingly, he was on the ground, too tired to move. Just laid there, tired, broken, but somehow strong, victorious, despite what happened. He felt that he had won somehow. You did well. You truly did. I was worried for you. Don't tell Celestia this. She didn't want me to pick favorites. I was worried for you. I wanted you to win. The others had heart, strength. But I knew it was you I wanted. Celestia was right when they were all worthy. Be proud, regardless of who we choose. You did well. I truly mean that. Thank you, Princess Luna. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for trusting in me. You're one of the few that have. Now, go to sleep. You're tired. You need rest. I do have much to discuss with my sister. I just wanted to let you know that your father would have been proud of you. And I'm proud of you. The others don't have pain the way you do. The way I do. We're a lot in common. In one way or another, I hope to see you again. Me too, Princess Luna. Thank you. Go to sleep. Tomorrow's another day. Tomorrow's a big day for you. Go to sleep. Then she touched her horn to his, and he just fell, peaceful and quiet, despite how his body felt. He just relaxed, calmed down. Just let the black just carry him. Just let everything go. In his mind he could feel her walking away, disappearing, but yet he could still feel her presence, as though she wasn't really gone, just watching over him, calming him. He was surprised by this. It reminded him of his mother when he was younger, when he was scared that she would just stay, just be there. He didn't know how to respond, except to just relax, go to sleep. Just accept whatever it was the princess was offering. Whatever she was trying to do for him, he no longer fought. Just relaxed. And just slept and rested. In the cool, reassuring confidence and peace of the dream. He was happy. He had done what he could. And he was proud. It may not have been the way he wanted, but he had not faltered. He had not given up. He had risen to the challenge. Perhaps not have passed it. Perhaps not win the war, but he had done everything he could to win the battle. So he fell asleep, knowing that he did his best. This simple fact, simple truth, brought a joy to his cold and sometimes troubled heart, filled it with calm and reassuring warmth. Then there was only black and peace. His whole thought just went away. He fell asleep. Morning would come, but it would come in its own time. For now, he just rested and was grateful that he was here, for all he had done, all those he had done it with. He knew he had done good. He owed those 3 other cadets something for that. Somehow he knew he couldn't have done it without them. But that last thought finally he gave him to sleep. This time sleep won, and He didn't wake until the following morning. End of part 2.